I'm going to kick off with just to get the conversation started, really. If anyone did see it, the CDDO team at Cabinet Office released an interesting paper yesterday on their latest update around the Secure by Design process, which is across the whole of government with slight nuances between Cabinet Office and MOD and so on, but in principle an infrastructure-driven initiative to ensure security throughout. I thought I'd kick that off as the question to get started. So the concept of Secure by Design, what are your thoughts on how we integrate security measures into core infrastructure? What's the impact on that concept in how we think about existing infrastructure systems?
I'm happy to jump in on that one.
I was going to say, I think it's one for you, Stephen Harrison, definitely.
Sure. I think it's probably one of those things that, in my mind makes you ask, well, why did it take so long for us to get here? Secure by Design is a really fundamental concept that I think should have been around since day zero. It certainly has been in terms of my own background. I'm specializing in that infrastructure space, but I made that choice really early on in my career to spend just as much time studying security as I did infrastructure, because I realized that they're absolutely joined up. If you don't have security at those foundational layers, there is no way to secure things as an afterthought. And I see a lot of organizations where their infrastructure teams and their cyber teams are separate. They work in silos in the organization. And I just sit there scratching my head going, there's no way that you can be effective like that, because if they're not joined up, you're not secure. And if you're not secure, your infrastructure is not reliable. A lot of the basics that you learn when you study cyber, they have what they call the CIA triad, right? So security means it's got confidentiality, integrity. What's the third one? Availability. But your infrastructure team doesn't work hand in hand with cyber. You're not going to achieve availability if you're not.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, designing something and then repeatedly put it in front of a security procedure that then says no, it just ends up with a lot of wasted effort and a lot of time spent doing that, going back and forwards. Therefore, it's completely inefficient.
Yeah, I absolutely echo what Stephen said. So we've been following kind of Secure by Design, kind of defense in depth principles for the last 10 to 15 years, from kind of an architectural approach, and certainly in high security and high data sensitivity environments, that's always been kind of core to the approach. That fundamentally starts with an understanding of your workloads, what you're going to utilize, therefore the potential threats that it might encounter, which all comes from that kind of organizational context around what you're actually going to, the purpose you're going to put it to. And some of those fundamental models that you see more about, to talk about the shift left of security and bringing it more into the engineering space. You take some of those applied control models around things like how do you do encryption, how do you do authentication, but also how you can bring some of those concepts around things like segmentation. If you do those during the design phase, that is significantly easier and lower cost than trying to add those things later. The last thing you want to do is get to the stage where you have kind of a working, functional business system and then try and inject security controls into it without destroying the user experience or the functionality of that thing underneath it. So you are kind of building it in the front with an understanding of what it is the organization's trying to achieve with that environment, means that you can aim to kind of reduce the friction on all of those controls.
That was
Adam, I'm really glad you mentioned defense in depth, because I think that's the other thing that a lot of people forget. We went through most of the 90s with this notion that, oh, I've got a firewall, I'm safe, right? Oh, that stuff's on the clean side of the firewall, it's fine. And you go, how many centuries was it that we found out that a little fence of pointy sticks wasn't enough to keep my village safe from the barbarians? But here we are in cyber, hundreds of years later, completely forgetting everything that society has learned about defense in depth. And you're going, well, we know this because the physical world, the cyber world, the concept isn't any different. If you don't have defense in depth, it's not if you will get breached, it's just when. Because the bad guys are inside, you can't keep them out. The question is what are you going to do about it when they get in? And I think for a lot of years, the answer was not very much. because that defense in depth just wasn't there. If you even knew the bad guys were inside, it was one of the cases where you were talking about, a very after the fact response to the event rather than some sort of a proactive measure or something going on in real time.
I was speaking to a customer not more than a week ago, and they've invested a huge amount of money into edge security, so SASE, etc. And he works in the infrastructure side of the business, and his concern was, as you said, Stephen, once they're in, my attack surface is so wide. How do I stop them moving across my infrastructure and accessing data, application systems, and proprietary information? I don't want them anywhere near. And that was one of his big concerns, and he ran the infrastructure part of the business.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a new thing in especially the higher levels of classification, because everything was just hidden behind type 1 encryption, right? It's unbreakable. You definitely can't get past that. So what we do after the fact is just totally fine. And then when your system gets more complex, as it does, and there are other points where it connects to things, as a review and then a gigantic flap,